On the 3rd of July, 1776, John Adams sat down to write his wife a prophecy. The day just past, he told her, would be remembered forever, celebrated with pomp and parade, with bonfires and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other. He was certain of the day. He was wrong by 2. And 30 years later, someone would quietly reach into that letter and correct his mistake for him, changing the words of a dead man to fit a holiday. Almost everything you know about the 4th of July is a story like this one. Not quite a lie. Just a legend that grew over the truth, until the truth was the part nobody remembered. Everything you know about the 4th of July is wrong. Start with the date. Americans keep the 4th of July as the day the nation declared independence. But the decision, the actual legal break with Britain, was made on the 2nd. On June the 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia had risen in the Continental Congress and moved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. That motion was the point of no return, and Congress adopted it on July the 2nd. It was closer than the holiday suggests. A trial vote on July the 1st showed only 9 colonies clearly in favor. Pennsylvania and South Carolina opposed, Delaware split, New York silent. Overnight, the majority was built by hand. South Carolina fell in line for unanimity's sake. 2 Pennsylvania opponents simply stayed home to let their colony flip, and Caesar Rodney of Delaware rode 80 miles through a thunderstorm to break his delegation's tie in person. On the 2nd, it carried 12 colonies to none.
The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations, from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore. John Adams, writing to his wife Abigail. The 3rd of July, 1776.
So why keep the 4th? Because it's the day Congress approved the wording, the text explaining a decision already made. That makes the holiday less wrong than the debunkers claim, a real anniversary, just of the document, not the deed. But even Adams got something wrong. He wrote that the vote passed without one dissenting colony. Yet New York hadn't voted yes at all. It abstained and didn't approve independence until July the 9th. The word unanimous was added only weeks later, describing a vote that never quite was. Then comes the strangest part of the story of the date. Adams predicted the 2nd, history kept the 4th, and beginning in 1805, that gap was closed by forgery. A partisan press, fighting over whether Adams or Jefferson deserved the glory, reprinted his private letter with the date changed. Where he had written the 2nd day of July, the Boston Gazette now printed the 4th. The altered version spread for decades and appeared in his own obituary on the day he died, the record edited to make the prophet seem right all along. Now picture the signing. 56 men, quills in hand, lining up beneath Jefferson's words on the 4th of July. It did not happen. The parchment everyone imagines did not yet exist on July the 4th. Congress only ordered it engrossed on July the 19th. The signing came later still. According to the secret journals of Congress, not made public until 1821, the engrossed declaration was signed by the members beginning on the 2nd of August, 1776, a full month after the date on the page. The truth of that document is stranger than the ceremony we imagine. The man who wrote out the beautiful parchment was not a statesman, but Timothy Matlack, a Philadelphia beer bottler with an elegant hand. Some who voted for independence never signed at all, among them John Dickinson and Robert Livingston, who had helped draft the thing. Others signed who had not even voted for it. George Read had voted no. And at least 8 of the signers weren't in Congress on the 4th of July to begin with. One of them didn't take his seat until November.
No person signed it on that day, nor for many days after. Thomas McKean, delegate from Delaware, writing in 1796.
And yet, This is the discipline of honest history. Even the correction is contested. Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin all insisted a signing had happened on the 4th. In 1986, the historian Wilfred Ritz argued they may have been right, that the evidence points to 2 signings, a now lost copy on the 4th and the famous parchment in August. So the honest verdict isn't nobody signed on the 4th, it's that the great signing was in August, and whether a smaller one came first is a real unsettled mystery. Here is a harder correction, because it lives inside your imagination. The declaration you picture, the honey-colored parchment, the thicket of signatures, Hancock's enormous flourish, is a document no American saw in July of 1776. What the country actually saw was a sheet of newsprint. On the night of the 4th into the 5th, the Philadelphia printer John Dunlap set the approved text in type and ran off perhaps 200 copies on a hand press. These broadsides carried no signatures at all, only 2 printed names, John Hancock, President, and Charles Thomson, Secretary. These were the declaration, as far as anyone in 1776 was concerned. Couriers carried the Dunlap broadside, newspapers reset it, town criers read it aloud from these printed sheets, not from any parchment. They were made in a hurry, and they show it. On some surviving copies, the watermarks are reversed, and the paper looks as if it was folded before the ink had dried. As Adams remembered the whole week, we were all in haste. Of the roughly 200 printed, 26 are known to survive. One of those survivors became a lottery ticket. In 1989, a man paid $4 for a dull painting at a Pennsylvania flea market, mostly, he said, for the frame. Folded behind the canvas was a Dunlap broadside, the 25th copy then known. It sold at auction in 1991 for about $2.5 million, and again in 2000 for roughly $8 million. You may have heard it sold on eBay. It didn't. That was a Sotheby's sale, held online. Even the correction needs correcting. While we're dismantling the document, 2 smaller myths. First, it wasn't written on hemp paper. The signed declaration is parchment, treated animal skin. The hemp story braids together 3 things: the rag paper of the drafts, which could contain hemp, Jefferson's real hemp fields, grown for rope and never for writing, and a good legend. Second, there's no secret map on the back. That comes straight from a 2004 Disney film, a myth the National Archives finally answered in writing. The message on the reverse is not invisible, they said, nor does it include a map. No myth of the 4th is more beloved, or more completely invented, than the Liberty Bell. The scene is fixed in the national memory, the old bellman waiting in the steeple, the boy below shouting the signal, and the great bell pealing out independence over Philadelphia. None of it is real. There is no contemporary record of the State House bell ringing for the Declaration, and the aging steeple may not have been sound enough to ring it safely. The whole scene was written by a novelist named George Lippard in 1847, 71 years after the fact, in a sentimental short story remembered by its refrain, "Ring, grandfather, ring!" The real announcement was quieter and later. The Declaration was first read in public on July the 8th at noon in the State House yard, by most accounts by Colonel John Nixon, and to Washington's army in New York on the 9th, whose soldiers answered by toppling a gilded statue of King George and melting it into musket balls. Bells probably did ring across the city that day, but nothing ties this particular bell to it. The nearest thing to the celebration, we imagine, came weeks later in Boston, where Adams's own wife watched the news arrive.
When Colonel Crafts read from the balcony of the State House the proclamation, the bells rang, the privateers fired, the forts and batteries were discharged. Every face appeared joyful. The king's arms were taken down and burnt. Abigail Adams, at Boston, July 1776.
The bell wasn't even called the Liberty Bell then. That name was given to it 60 years later, not by patriots, but by abolitionists, who took the bell as a symbol of freedom for the enslaved and printed its new name across their pamphlets. The inscription they seized on proclaimed liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, had been cast into the bronze back in 1751, chosen to mark the 50th anniversary of William Penn's colonial charter. It had nothing to do with the Revolution. The bell was made famous and even named by the very people the new nation had left out. Consider the authorship. We say Jefferson wrote the Declaration alone, and that its ideas were wholly his own. Both halves are myths. Jefferson was the principal draftsman of a committee of 5, with Adams, Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Adams and Franklin edited his draft before it ever reached the floor. And then Congress itself went to work on it, cutting roughly a quarter of Jefferson's words. About a fifth of the text struck out over a few days of debate, which Jefferson sat through in something close to agony.
Neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular and previous writing, it was intended to be an expression of the American mind. Thomas Jefferson, on the Declaration, 1825.
He was being more honest than his admirers. The framework, natural rights, government by consent, descended from John Locke and a century of argument. And the most famous cadence in the document had a close and rather awkward echo. Just weeks earlier, on June the 12th, Virginia had adopted a Declaration of Rights, written mostly by George Mason. It opened like this:
that all men are by nature equally free and independent, and have certain inherent rights. The enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. George Mason, in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, June 1776.
Weeks before all men are created equal, Mason had written, all men are by nature equally free and independent. Jefferson's gift was not invention but compression, taking the era's arguments and forging them into sentences that could not be forgotten. Though even his most quoted line was not his final wording. His rough draft did not say we hold these truths to be self-evident. The change to that word is traditionally credited to Franklin's pen, though no one is quite sure. What Jefferson first wrote was stranger, and to some ears finer.
We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which are the preservation of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, from the Rough Draught, June 1776.
And then there is the passage that never made it in at all, the single most consequential edit in the nation's founding document. In his draft, Jefferson had arraigned King George for the slave trade itself, in language of real fury, blaming the crown for the buying and selling of human beings.
He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this execrable commerce. Thomas Jefferson, from the deleted passage of the Declaration, June 1776.
Congress struck it out. By Jefferson's own account, the clause was deleted to appease South Carolina and Georgia and northern delegates whose merchants had grown rich carrying the trade. But the deeper irony needs no footnote. That furious indictment of slavery was written by a man who enslaved more than 600 people across his life, who freed only a handful, all from a single family, who died so deep in debt that the people he owned were sold at auction to pay his creditors. The hand that wrote against the market where men should be bought and sold had spent a lifetime inside it. And he did not draft it alone. Through the weeks he worked in his rented rooms in Philadelphia, Jefferson was attended by an enslaved boy named Robert Hemmings, about 14 years old, who would have helped him dress, brought his meals, and slept nearby. So the sentence, "all men are created equal," was composed by a man who owned people, in a room served by an enslaved child. The contradiction was not hidden in the basement of American history. It was in the room, holding the candle. Nor can we say they simply didn't know better by the standards of their time, because their own time told them. Quakers had condemned slavery in Philadelphia since 1688. A British court had already ruled slavery so odious that only positive law could sustain it. And from London, the writer Samuel Johnson had put the question that hangs over the whole celebration.
How is it that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of Negroes? Samuel Johnson, 1775.
Jefferson had no answer, only a kind of dread. Decades later, asked how the nation might ever escape what it had built, he reached for the image of a man holding something that will kill him the moment he lets go.
We have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale, and self-preservation in the other. Thomas Jefferson, 1820. Hennem's down.
After all that wait, a lighter fraud, the famous one-liners. When Hancock signs his huge signature, he supposedly declares that King George can read it now without his spectacles. As the delegates commit treason, Franklin supposedly quips, "We must all hang together, or we shall all hang separately." Both are beloved. Neither appears in a single record from 1776. Hancock's spectacles surface in unsourced histories generations later. Franklin's pun is traced no further back than a footnote, first printed in 1840, 64 years after the fact. The fair verdict is not that Franklin never said it. A man like Franklin may well have said a dozen things like it. The verdict is that we have no evidence he did, and a clear paper trail showing exactly when the story appeared. And that is the pattern behind nearly every myth of the Fourth. Not an outright lie, but a later invention. A good line, a stirring scene, a tidy date, dressed in the costume of 1776 and sent back in time. Even the picture is misread. The painting on the back of the $2 bill, John Trumbull's crowded rotunda scene, is universally called the signing of the Declaration. It isn't. By the architect of the Capitol's own description, it shows June the 28th, 1776, when the drafting committee presented its work to Congress, days before the vote, weeks before any signing. Trumbull painted 47 men, some never in that room together. He knew it, and chose it anyway, preferring, he said, to preserve the founders' faces over the accuracy of the scene. The holiday itself was slow to harden and partisan from the start. The first organized celebration came a year later, on the 4th of July, 1777, in Philadelphia. Fireworks, ships firing, the whole city lit. But within a generation, Federalists and Republicans were holding rival Fourths, with competing parades and toasts, the same partisanship that would later Dr. Adams's letter. And for all the fireworks, the 4th of July did not become a paid federal holiday until 1938, 162 years after the fact. By now, you may distrust everything, so here's the turn. Some of the strangest stories about the 4th are entirely true. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the two men most responsible for the Declaration, allies turned bitter rivals turned old friends, died on the very same day, the 4th of July, 1826, the exact 50th anniversary. Jefferson went first at Monticello near midday. Adams followed that evening in Massachusetts. His last words, as later recorded, were of his rival, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He was wrong. Jefferson had died some 5 hours before. It is almost too neat to believe, and it is documented. Then it compounds. James Monroe, the 5th president, also died on the 4th of July in 1831, 3 of the first 5 presidents gone on Independence Day. And Calvin Coolidge, the 30th president, was born on the 4th of July in 1872, the only president born on the date. The coincidences are real. The anti-slavery clause really was cut. New York really did abstain. The truth of the 4th is stranger than the myths we put in its place. So what's left when the legends are stripped away? Not a smaller story, a truer one. Independence was a close, contested human thing, built by tired men through absence and a midnight ride. The words that outlived them were borrowed, edited, compromised, and greater for surviving it. And the noblest line was written above a silence. The people who were not free, not counted, not in the room except to serve it. The last word belongs to the man who spoke for them, a formerly enslaved American, 76 years later.
What, to the American slave, is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. Frederick Douglass, at Rochester, the 5th of July, 1852.
The myths of the 4th flatter us. The facts implicate us, which is exactly why they are worth knowing. To pull the legend apart is not to love the country less, but to look at it honestly, to see who was in the room, who was kept out, and what was struck from the page before the ink was dry. The fireworks are the same either way, only now you know what they are for and what they are not.